My grandfather was a park service ranger, and he would always tell me these stories. Apparently, on the plot of land that he owned, there was some kind of weird figure that would appear every so often. Now, you couldn't ask him exactly what it was and get necessarily a clear answer, because it would change from time to time. He basically wasn't sure exactly what it was, and each time he would describe it different, usually using the different emotions of which he felt while spotting it. Exactly the same thing would happen with my grandma. Sometimes it was like this thing was angry, sometimes it was like it was hurting, sometimes it was like it was lonely, and sometimes it was like it was lost. But one thing was sure, they always reported seeing it, and it actually gone back to their parents and grandparents. Now apparently there was some kind of ancient burial site upon this land, and I didn't know about it until I got older. But allegedly, there have been multiple sightings of something tall, skeletal in appearance, which apparently would roam the land randomly. The first time of which it was sighted was near the small river and the lake that's on the back of their property. Apparently, it was seen virtually hovering across the water by my great-grandpa. Apparently he was hunting one day and stopped for a while to rest by it when he saw this thing. Apparently it scared him so much that he actually tried to fire shots at it. He said either he had the worst aim in the world that day, or that thing was some kind of spirit and the shots were going through it. He didn't know. He was so scared that he actually left his gun there. It was out of ammo by that point, but he wanted to get away as quick as possible and not necessarily carry any dead weight whatsoever. The next time it was spotted was by his wife a few years later. Apparently she was out trying to pick wild berries on their property one day when she could see a skeletal head staring at her from behind a tree. At first she thought it was some kind of animal that had died there many years ago and they hadn't realised, but then she said the thing moved. So weird sightings actually come from their guests too, and not only them. Even all the way up to my grandpa. Apparently my grandpa first realised it was there when he was there during one Christmas. And apparently he was out playing with some of the other kids and he noticed a strange gown. He said this time it was red in colour, which was weird because usually it appears as black. At first he thought it was a tree, or at least the stump of a tree, of which was different colour to the rest of the woods, until he realised it was moving and he can see a face. The way that he describes it, now God bless him, he doesn't have much knowledge of Star Wars, but he said it looked like one of the characters with 4 lightsabers. I can't remember the specific name, but you know the one when it's got its hood up, but if it was red. From the sounds of that story, I was pretty creeped out by my grandpa, but then he says there was more. Apparently, there was another time that he was playing with his friends, and he actually saw multiple of this thing. Weirdly, apparently it also had glowing orange eyes. That's how he noticed there was more than one. He can't say for absolute certain because it was quite dark at this time, but he's pretty convinced it was, and they weren't isolated incidents. Now, I actually spent a lot of time out of there. I ended up spending quite a lot of time to just get away from my parents. At least that's what I think they were doing. My grandparents had a lot of time to look after me, so I was often there. My memory of my grandparents was absolutely loving. Like, I honestly couldn't have asked for better grandparents who were more loving or caring. It's something I don't think I really appreciated so much when I was young, actually, because they were kind of always there. So it's something that I kind of got a better appreciation for and grasp as when they weren't here, which I always regretted. But anyway, so I remember taking some walks there during the summertime when I was a bit younger. I've grown up with these stories pretty much all my life, so probably about 8 or 9 out of 10 times that I'd actually go out there, I was half expecting to have some kind of horrifying encounter. Though it never really happened, I actually went out there multiple times with an overactive imagination, really wishing that something would happen to me. The stupidest thing I ever did was I actually called for it a few times. Now, I don't know why I actually did this, but again, nothing would happen. I remembered one specific day though when I was out there seemed to be some kind of haze up ahead. It was almost like there was a big filter and there was some kind of fog which wasn't there before suddenly over part of the scenery. I do think to myself that this is particularly weird. It's something I haven't seen before and my young mind can't comprehend it. I had a really weird feeling too, and strangely there was some kind of static in the air which was making the fibres on my jumper stand up and also the hair on my arms and the hair on my head. I looked up scared there was going to be a lightning strike. I've been told about them before. This was before you had the videos to watch on the internet, but I was aware of it. I think maybe they told me in school about it one day, but I digress. I did look up and there was no rain clouds whatsoever. So I think this is specifically weird. It's almost like I'd walked into some kind of electrical storm, of which there was no storm, just the electrical aspects of it. So this was a deeply weird moment. I kind of felt uncomfortable. I've looked up the feeling later on in life and it's similar to what those experience when they're in the vicinity of infrasound. Just a deep unhappiness and feeling that something is off, where your mind and body can't comprehend what's happening. I remembered walking around for a while. I kind of wanted to see the Reaper thing. Every time I said the word Reaper, my grandpa would say, no, that's not it, no. But that's how I described it, and that's how it sounded. So yeah, I was looking for this thing constantly, but nothing would happen, so I headed back. I think this was really odd. I remembered when I got home, my grandparents asked what was wrong with my hair, and I said, I don't know, some kind of storm. They both looked at each other and my grandpa laughed. He knew there wasn't a storm. It was really nice and sunny outside. He thought I was just messing around or something, or had wore one of his hats and not said. He actually brought this up and I said, no, I'm serious. That's what it was. He then laughs and we go about our day. I constantly pester him though to learn more and more about the Reaper. He tells me not to call it that. He describes it as an entity, but I continue with my term. I say, how do you feel when it's there? What happens? He says, I don't know, you just kind of feel off, almost like you're being hunted, and you'll know when that thing is there. You feel like you're being watched. I've had it times where I could look up between two trees and there was something staring at me through them. As I locked eyes, my vision would go blurry and there it would be, that horrible skeleton looking thing. Apparently too, sometimes it would appear with more of a horse head, which actually sounded more scary to me. Whenever you actually got to where it was before, there was also a bad smell allegedly. The thing that I wasn't too scared about though is that apparently it never actually harmed anyone or anything. Well, at least that's what I thought. Apparently, they had a pet dog there before which everybody loved. It was a really nice Labrador and it would roam the land freely. However, one night, the dog didn't come back and they start to panic a little bit. They think, oh god, what if this dog has actually gone into the river and drowned? Then one of the neighbours actually reported seeing something by it, and the description sounded like our dog or an animal very similar to it. So worried, we decide to head over and see what's wrong, my grandfather says. When they get there, they can only describe a scene out of a horror film. Apparently the dog was there, but it was entirely drained of blood, and there were some bite marks near its neck. I don't know what kind of creature could have possibly done that. I just knew that it was one that I did absolutely not want to encounter, now or at any point in the future. So what did you do, Grandpa? I buried it, very deep in the ground. He said weirdly though, no flowers seemed to grow around there, or plants, or anything, not even moss. I now feel a little more unsettled and I start to sweat a little bit as I'm uncomfortable in my chair. I actually felt quite stressed out by hearing that. I can see by the look in my grandpa's face that he wishes that he didn't tell me that and I was probably too young to hear it. He says, now son, listen to me. Don't be scared to go out of there. Haven't seen it for years. It could have been anything. I mean, that was kind of a back in my day thing. Now you're probably safe out there. Yeah, great, I thought. I could not stop thinking about this thing. The problem was too, like I said, this is back in the day when that you can only really research things through libraries or actually seeing them and experiencing things. But again, I'm not going to go to the library. And why not explore? For a couple of weeks I actually refused to go out through the forest, but eventually the curiosity and inquisitive part of me took over, so I head out once more. I'm going down a trail and walking down quite a steep incline. My grandpa was supposed to repair stairs here, but he hasn't. Well, kind of more like board decking, but it's quite annoying really. I eventually make it down and I get my white shoes very dirty. I'm just going to wash them off in the lake later on though, I think. Now, as I continue down doing my exploring, I'm pretty convinced nothing is going to happen when I see something odd. I can see a hand moving behind a tree. It's a very white hand too at that. It almost looked impossibly white. Then the clouds move behind the sun and I can see that it's kind of like a dark yellow colour. That's odd. It looks extremely skinny. I thought maybe it was some kind of animal. It kind of looked more like a chicken leg, I guess, than anything, but I didn't dare get closer to it as I saw one of the thumbs move in. I'm now not sure if what I was looking at was some kind of caterpillar or something similar to that, as I'd start to make my slow retreat to get away from it. I think it's weird. Just as this happens, that weird static starts to pick up in the air again and I can taste a metallic thing in my mouth. I don't know what it is, but I have a cold sweat now, and I quickly head back to my grandpa's. I decided not to say what had happened because I wasn't likely to be allowed out again if I said that I've gone off exploring on my own without telling anyone. My excuse for going out there was something much different, so I knew it wouldn't necessarily sit well if they'd found out what had actually happened. So now, I just go to bed. But I can't stop thinking of it. There was just something odd about it. I had no idea what I'd seen at that time, and that part of me was eating me up. So I decided to do another adventure. Now this is the following day. I go to the exact spot where the hand is, and while I'm walking there, I can't get the possibilities out of my head. I wish I had somebody else there with me to go exploring with, but I think my grandpa's going to be annoyed if I tell him. He was also doing some work on the cars now. He'd actually made me promise him before that I wouldn't go out there too far on my own, and I made a promise and I wasn't going to break that because it would upset him. I was being brave though. I was just hoping I wouldn't end up like the dog. Now I make it to the exact tree where I saw the hand, and weirdly, some of the ground below it seems to have died. It's almost like you've got all these perfectly healthy trees everywhere, but suddenly, on this specific one, just where the hand was, it seems like it's just dead, like loose bark, and also the ground doesn't have any plants which seem to be surviving. I do check a couple of times to make sure that this is actually the exact same tree, and it turns out that it is, which again is super weird for me. I'm not sure what to think of it. I decide to explore further and further. Now I do this for quite a long time, because eventually the sun starts to set, and I now realise that it's time for me to get back. That's when I noticed something strange that I didn't before. There's some kind of pile of sticks in the ground that wasn't there before. I initially thought it was my grandpa making some kind of bonfire or something, so I'm actually more confident and happy in this moment. I'm expecting to see him and to go and say hello to him, and to have a little explore around together. Well, I get closer and closer and I realise that something is quite odd actually. It seems like this little pile is not sticks, they're bones. Now I don't know where these bones could have possibly come from. I go to pick one up, but I'm froze there for a second. Something just felt odd, and I have that strange feeling coming over me again. Like something is odd, and something bad might be about to happen. Now it sounds very similar to what my grandpa described, with the feelings of everything, and I notice this is strange. The pile was probably about 2 feet tall, and I thought that was extremely weird. I then head back. I don't get too far back when I hear some kind of language spoke. I thought maybe it was somebody from a foreign place, but it sounds different. It's almost like very loud deep sounds in a quick succession which then stop, and some kind of growling type sound. I'm froze there trying to see where this is coming from, and I just cannot find it. Now, I decide to turn away from this. I don't want to scare myself. It's getting dark and I'm not far away from getting in trouble with my grandpa and my grandma and my parents, and I don't want to have to suffer the consequences of that. So I continue bounding along until I'm halfway back. I don't hear the sounds again, but I think this is rather odd. Then, as I'm halfway back, I see something from behind a tree, which I can't describe. Somebody steps out, who I'd have to describe as about 7 feet tall, wearing a very flowing gown. And I look up, and I can see dark holes where eyes are supposed to be, and I see the face of a skeleton, and something animated moving around with it. It's not moving normally, it's kind of dancing, zigzagging from side to side, almost like it's glitching for a second. I say, huh? I say grandpa, thinking that it's him somehow, but it isn't. I look around and everything seems so dark, and it sounds like a storm's about to pick up. I'm froze there for a while, as this thing seems to slowly edge towards me. It's very hard to tell what direction that it's actually going in, because it kind of moves backwards before it goes forward. I decide to walk further down. I'm actually closer to home this way to see if this thing's following me, and it seems to. I was honestly awestruck by this. I didn't immediately connect the dots of what I was seeing to what my grandpa had described before and other members of my family, but I moved down a bit further now. This thing was moving extremely slow. I mean, probably like quarter of my walking speed. For a good 5 or 10 minutes, I kept changing directions to see if this thing would stop following me, but it wasn't. It was getting closer and I didn't realize it at first, until I can see more and more detail. This thing looked just like the Reaper, just as I thought, and now the cards all fell on me at once. I scream and start running, and just like in your dreams, I seem to run extremely slow. I don't know why this was actually, I still don't to this day, but my legs were probably so scared that I couldn't run with any kind of pace whatsoever. So I'm left there trying desperately to get away from this thing, going slow as anything, and I seem to be not going much quicker myself. I heard snapping sounds now too. They're very loud, almost like gunshots, but it sounded like something was snapping in half constantly. I eventually make it back towards where my grandparents' house is. I was absolutely covered in sweat, and my grandma finds me and then says, "God, did you go swimming?" I say no, and I can't let out the words. I eventually get back in, and she punishes me and tells me off for going swimming in the lake. I get told to bath off quickly, and that I better explain to my grandpa why I was swimming out there. I'm stuck in the bath, literally shivering. It was a hot bath too. That's how scared I was. When I saw my grandpa, I actually didn't have the heart to tell him what I was doing and what I saw. It wasn't until months later that I could actually reveal what happened and why I wouldn't go out of the house and why I was so scared that night. He then looks at me and says, "I know what you saw, son, just please don't go out there again." And I agreed. I never did. Eventually I got older and completely forgot about the experience. That was until I had a bad dream which reminded me of it. I don't actually believe the Reaper's a real thing, but I don't know how else to describe what I saw that day. I want you guys to let me know what you think it could have been. I don't know if my incidents were isolated too, but I'm really having nightmares about it again and I want them to stop. I want to get closure to this. Now, the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now, what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a Forest Server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there, and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now, I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night, you'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now, I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened. We just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie, especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night and I walked towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you've hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's fallen quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleep, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd and I tell myself just to relax a bit, and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose, it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time, I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often, I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice one or two strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier, and I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't hum here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around, so that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's going to hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but it almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods. And I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, and I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits, and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso, and very long skinny arms that dragged the floor. But I don't know where they gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now, I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared and it was extremely close to me. For whatever reason, it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now, it reminds me of a story of what one of my other fire ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw, in terms of how he described it, the way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now, I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist. And again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now, I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again, and I can't see anything. For a second, I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of 2 eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where that the light is, and it's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me why wasn't I more scared of that weird thing I'd seen, and to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something, and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remember they were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now, I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions, I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refused to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it. Just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same. And you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realised that this definitely isn't the moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit. Not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit, and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seem to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood, or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light. But again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist's watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working. I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did. And this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now the closer I get, there's something else I notice which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again, it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's a eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment, I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it is a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now, some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So, I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is, and I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I'd see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my light on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there. But again, I just presumed it was people. And I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long. And they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later, I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly, and I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour, but I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but in those moments it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced that I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though, and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me, but again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery's virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery's low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone. I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace, and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now, momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends, and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything, and I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest, and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me. Okay, so it's been a while, but I've decided it's finally time for me to share my experience with everyone. I currently work as a forest service worker. I've done this for not too many years, and something jogged my memory recently. This is something that happened when I was much younger, and it's something that I've not really been able to forget. It was I and a group of friends who decided to explore a cabin which had been long abandoned in a forested area close to where we all lived. We were all excited to go there. There were rumours that there was more than meets the eye there. We basically were convinced that it was haunted and that we're going to find all kinds of ghosts and things there. You know, just typical things to get teenage boys excited about exploring, so we head out. As we head out, it had been raining recently, and our parents told us not to get dirty. I actually had a big umbrella, so I was pretty happy. I knew too that I could probably utilise this as some kind of weapon if I really needed. So we're heading out into the forest, and it has a really cool vibe to it. We're pretty sure where this thing is, and we're excited to go. There were the odd leaves falling down, and it wasn't too far away from Halloween, so we were definitely ready to be spooked out. It's funny saying that in hindsight. So we start walking when suddenly a man appears on the path up ahead. He looks pretty weird with a long white beard. He's saying things but kind of stopping every few seconds. Nobody understands what he wants, but he looks really weird. He suddenly locks eyes with me and for some reason just won't stop staring at me. I find this especially weird, and I felt like I was almost caught in a trance while making eye contact with this weirdo. I tell him to leave me alone. Eventually though, he walks off into the stream, literally into the water going uphill. I don't know how he was able to do so, but he literally just takes off, and that was the last we ever saw of him. We look at each other and decide to start jogging a bit. The thing is, we don't know who this person is or why he's out here, but he's definitely weird. Maybe it's some kind of guy that likes to live off the land or something, who knows. But we left him to go his separate way to us. I felt pretty good at the time. I felt like this is it. This is what we wanted. Everything's coming together suddenly, and this is the moment that we've been waiting for. We start to make up some things and imagine that he's probably come from the cabin that we're heading to. We eventually see the cabin, and that thing looks scary. It was almost like it had just been planted in the middle of nowhere. This is long before we had mobile phones or any good way to communicate with our parents, so you really felt the desolation of the area. Especially because, well, we lived in a pretty remote area to begin with, but if you go into the forest, there's all kinds of crazy things out here. We had regular sightings of Bigfoots and UFOs, you know, all the good stuff. But this thing felt different. We bravely start making our way towards the cabin. Apparently there's another group of friends who one of the people I'm with knows, and said allegedly if you go there on your own at night, crazy things will happen to you. The ghosts will try and kill you. As he said that, my friend made me jump and it annoyed me. But we pressed forward and eventually get to the cabin. There was no door to worry about. We ended up heading in, and I can see a way down to a cellar. Now this is interesting. This wasn't on the script. We knew there was more to this place, but none of us expected to find something like that so early. So that was definitely an interesting moment for us. We have a look around and there doesn't seem to be anybody else present. That's when we realise it. We call him Steve. Crazy Steve has appeared again. He seems to have a pan on his head too, which was really weird. We think, God, does he live here? Is he cooking? But he can't be, the place is abandoned. He's just watching from behind a rock, saying all kinds of gibberish, but clearly in our direction. You know the homeless guy who ends up in the freezer on The Simpsons? Well, it kind of looked like him. He's wearing actually similar clothes, which is quite funny thinking of it now. He doesn't seem to be getting any closer though, so we decide to investigate a bit more. I know this probably isn't smart or wise to turn your back on an absolute weirdo living out there, but he seems to be relatively harmless. I can't stop thinking about that basement though. What could be in there? It was definitely odd. So we wait in here for a little while, and we realise that Steve's got a bit closer now. He's moved even further along to a rock. He always seems to hide behind these big rocks or trees, like he knows what he's doing to not be seen by us. Yeah, I'm getting more and more freaked out now, and we decide that we should probably go back. Now we've decided to start picking up the pace a little bit. We've started running now to try and get away from him. At first he doesn't do anything. Then a loud thud happens and I'm forced to look behind myself. There he is, throwing something towards us. It's a pan. We can hear more gibberish in a very loud and dark tone, and we can hear pat pat pat. He's chasing after us. My God, was he quick. One of my friends screams out, how can this old guy be so quick? Honestly, it was almost inhuman the pace that he set. He was gaining on us, and all of us were pretty healthy and should have had much more pace on him, but we don't seem to in that moment, and it's really frustrating. We start running as fast as we possibly can, desperate to get away from this weirdo. Eventually we make it out of the forest and we seem to have lost him. What the heck was that? We all say, as we're all entirely dumbfounded as to who that was and why he was chasing us. We eventually get back home safely and not too much else happens, but something was stuck in my mind. I just couldn't forget about that guy in that cabin. I don't know why, and that led me to a few years later, when I was in the area on my own. When I got a bit older, I got into the habit of going for night walks in that place. I'd long forgotten about that guy for the meantime, and I felt pretty safe out there. I was going for one of my night jogs actually on this specific occasion, one where I was my typical indecisive self, and I couldn't decide whether to jog or walk, so I did both periodically. And would you know, there's a cabin up ahead. It looks so nice, so inviting and enticing. And there's the thunder. A storm was brewing. It just felt too perfect and excellent to be out there. I suddenly got buckets of energy from who knows where, and I decided that it's my time to investigate alone. I wanted to know what was in that basement. Nobody had told me this stuff before, and the adrenaline and excitement was taking over for me. I take a moment to look around and I think, Steve, I hope you're not here now. As I go in and I say sorry, almost as though I was acknowledging in my head that what I was about to do wasn't smart, but I was going to do it anyway. So off I go, towards the cabin. Every footstep I take, I can feel my heart beating quicker and quicker as I get closer and closer to this cabin. And what do you know? The next moment I'm in there. Yes, it's just like I remember. It's almost like every room that I look into is another part of nostalgia for me as I feel more and more excited seeing it. You know what, I'm going to come back here with all my buddies. We've got to do this again and explore. And then I see it. The path with stairs, and I can't help but go into it. So I do so, and I go up initially, then I go down, deeper and deeper. This place is huge. Something falls next to me and I can hear almost an echo, a reverberation. Wow, this is cool. I then realise that it goes on quite far, and I want to see how far this thing actually goes. So off I go. There's quite a large concrete wall to my left, then a small tunnel which goes off to the right next to it. I actually have a flashlight with me, so I flick it on for a second. I tied it onto my sweatband that I'm wearing, and I've got pretty good visibility. I had to put my sweatband the wrong way, kind of having it vertically on my head, but it does the job perfectly. I was almost like a surgeon or mechanic now, operating with true precision. So I start making my way along when suddenly I see a drop off ahead of me. I slowly feel around the sides of it, and it doesn't seem too large. I can see the bottom for a second with my flashlight, and would you know, the thing falls off. It knocks itself out along with the battery at the same time, and I can't find it, so I go to turn back, and then I feel warmth up my arm, and suddenly a pulse. It's my pulse. I'm grabbed and almost fall headfirst into the tunnel, but I stop myself and scream. Something is gripping onto me. I reach down and feel a hand, a human arm. I cannot seem to loosen this thing's grip until I smash it as hard as I can. I actually miss and really hurt my hand hitting the side at first, but I'm able to get free. I don't hear anything after that, and I scurry back screaming. I'm screaming every few seconds while I catch my breath and eventually make my way back up the stairs again. I start running, and I can't really see clear. I realise now that lots of dust and things has kicked into my eyes, and I say, how can this happen? It can't get worse for me. I can't see where I'm going, but luckily, I know the area well, as I run through some of the forestry. It seems like the forest is closing in on me as I get closer and closer to escaping. I kept up a beautiful pace and eventually make it to the border of the woods. I start screaming over and over again, not knowing what on earth happened to me. Was it Steve? Did he finally come back to get me? I don't know. I eventually make it home quickly and I tell my parents about what's happened, and my dad insists on calling the cops or going back there himself, but my mum says no, just leave it, it's probably just some weird homeless person out there. I then vowed to myself and my parents that I'm never going to go back there again, and you know what? I didn't. I never found out why that happened or who it was. I don't know what made me think of it again so much recently, but I just want the answers, but at the same time I don't.